The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock. I'm gonna give it maybe 2 more minutes to wait for others to join us. Thank you for attending. Okay, I think I would like to go ahead and start. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today's topic is about improving sustainability, metrics for improving your environmental performance. My name is Sandra Tiso. I'm one of the project managers of the Energy and Sustainability Service Group that is part of the Georgia MEP program. The MEP program is an extension program that is hosted by the Georgia Tech. I'm also in charge of the Partnership for a Sustainable Georgia. And before we go ahead and start, allow me to tell you what this partnership is about and what our mission and purpose is. So the Partnership for a Sustainable Georgia is a program created by the EPA Region 4, or the Environmental Protection Agency from the United States, which provides basic funds to support pollution prevention technical assistance in the state of Georgia. The goal of this partnership is to help organizations like yourself across the state of Georgia to identify projects that leads to eliminate or reduce pollution, help you to conserve energy and water, as well as be more efficient in the way that materials or chemicals are used, so your environmental footprint can be enhanced, and at the same time, you obtain or achieve savings in your operational cost. The members of this partnership include the Green Chamber of the South, Oglethorpe Power Company, or OPC, and the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So the Green Chamber of the South provides networking events and opportunities for professionals of various industries to get together and promote sustainability, share best practices, learn from others' experiences. So they have a greenhouse acceleration program that covers and is intended to be provided to the entire Southeast region. The OPC, through their electric membership companies, provide energy and sustainability services to their customers at a heavily discounted prices. Last but not least, the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership, as I said before, is hosted at Georgia Tech here in the state of Georgia. Is that extension partnership that helps manufacturing companies to grow and stay competitive in multiple areas, At the moment, there are 10 regional offices across the state just to provide close assistance to the manufacturing community in the region. We are a group of about 60 professionals with both national and international working experience with manufacturing companies, helping them to increase top line growth and reduce their bottom line cost. Some of the impacts of the services that are provided in the region can be are presented in here. Currently, as of last year, we were able to assist and partner with over 1,000 Georgia manufacturing companies. We help them to ensure their business practices and stay stable in the region. We help them to align their performance indicators with the company's goals and strategic business planning process. And we help them to identify and implement changes to help and plan their future. Some of the areas of expertise that are in the MEP group here at Georgia Tech relate to business development and business growth, helping top management and leaders across organizations to identify business opportunities, market trends arises in the horizon, integrate technology and advances in technology with existing companies' way of doing businesses, reduce waste to improve efficiency, enhance quality of their products, not only to meet customer demands, but also to work more effectively, generate energy cost savings, and improve the environmental footprint to increase profitability. Today, I'm honored to introduce the Director of the Energy and Sustainability Service Group, Mr. Randy Green. He is a mechanical engineer from Georgia Tech, also has an MBA from Georgia State University. He brings more than 30 years of experience working with energy systems such as steam, pumping, and compressed air systems, helping manufacturing companies to manage them more efficient. He's also a lead auditor for energy management systems that are based on ISO 50001. He is the Department of Energy SCP Performance Verifier and also a certified practitioner. He brings over 35 years of experience in the industry, and I'm pleased to introduce you to him. And I know from my own experience that you're going to learn a lot from his experience and vast information on the subjects related to environmental performance improvement. Randy.
Thank you, Sandra. And
so let me make you an introducer. Oh,
I got it.
Okay.
So are you seeing my slides or the other screen?
I'm looking at the other screen. I don't see your slides yet.
Hang on.
And while you're getting there, let me just cover some typical housekeeping items. You are on mute, but feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions. There is also a 10 minutes Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So if you don't want to interrupt, that's fine. You will have some time at the end, but feel free to also make it interactive. If you have something that you want to comment, you can raise your hand at the chat. I will be hosting the webinar, so I will probably letting Randy know if there are some comments or questions.
So you should be able to see my slides now. Can you, Sandra?
I do.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for joining today. I appreciate you taking some time to come and share this topic with us. I will say on a personal note, it's certainly a passion of mine, our topic, and hopefully we can make some points to encourage those of you who have the position or the opportunity to take what we talk about today, and make it effective in your practice or your organization. So we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the case for developing environmental metrics. Why do we need to worry about this at all? And why actually trying to measure our impacts and results, why that's important. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about how to get this established in your organization, how to get started with developing the data and the metrics associated with your environmental performance, and then how do you keep those in place. It's important certainly to set this up, but it's more important that that you finish, that you keep using what the metrics are telling you to drive your environmental performance. And I want to talk a little bit about what you can do after the basics and getting started. You can look at some simple data, but there are more advanced ways to think about your environmental impacts. And we will mention a couple of tools that you can potentially take advantage of in this topic. So why are we trying to make the case for developing metrics? And certainly you don't have to read much news or watch news in a video format to have an appreciation for the public pressure that really is in the marketplace today for in the business climate for organizations to improve their environmental responsibility, their environmental performance. Certainly the significance of climate change and other environmental impacts that are the result of really a globalized economy have contributed to our need for us to think differently about the way we operate, not just our businesses, but all of our organizations. And certainly organizations are feeling pressure, to promote an image of social responsibility. And as their competition does, even if they don't feel that social responsibility directly, competitive pressures in the marketplace as they compete for consumers and their customers' business who are attracted to organizations who tell a good story about their, social responsibility. So we see this. But in the end, isn't it the right thing to do? Don't we want, if we can be more efficient, if we can be more environmentally friendly, if we can be less impactful and achieve the other outcomes that, our businesses are there for, why would we not want to do this? So it is the right thing to do. But what is that? Certainly in the public arena that we've seen and the pressure that has come to bear in society, and I think the pandemic that we're coming through as we speak today really has changed the marketplace. Certainly the ability to meet and communicate without having to travel has been greatly influenced by the mass exposure to mediums like we're using today for this webinar. But I think businesses also are using this opportunity to say, let's not just go back to the way we were operating in before the pandemic. How can we come out of this with a different mode of operation? And so there is a lot of interest in response to the demands in the market, the public pressure, and just the public climate related to climate change and the need for organizations to present something different. And we've seen things like zero carbon or net zero commitments and promises to zero waste, 100% renewable. These are all certainly feel-good terms, things that we, would agree that if we could achieve those, that it would be a good thing for us if we could somehow figure out a way to get our energy supply in a way that it did not exhaust the resources of the planet, but it was renewable and it had minimal or zero impact on the environment. What about zero waste? But what does that mean? What do we really mean when we say something's 100% renewable, or all of our energy comes, the result of our energy consumption in our organization has a net zero effect on adding carbon to the atmosphere? Whoop. So I think there's, they sound good. They certainly help everyone feel better about things, but what are we measuring? What does that mean? How do we really know if one of your favorite brands tomorrow, and probably if you went to the website for any consumer brand or most major corporations today, you would find some commitment to sustainability, and within that you would find something like a commitment to zero waste or zero carbon, renewable energy. But we don't really, in the corporations sharing that, what does that mean? Some of them do a good job of breaking that down and saying, by this time, within this time frame, we'll reach this state in the way we supply energy, or the way we consume energy, or the way we produce waste. But some of them just make the commitments without a lot of detail. And how do we know that we really achieve that once we get there? So in the end, something, has to indicate, we need something to tell us that we're close, or we haven't even gotten started yet. How do we know that? And so trying to understand the basis for evaluating the impacts that we make on the environment are very important. And in the end, we have to look at some way to measure or analyze and know what those impacts are. So some corporations will even go take the approach, and I've seen this implemented in supply chains as well. The slide talks about the environmental management system in ISO 14001, but it could also be in programs like the EPA Energy Star. And they become labels that organizations try to promote as a demonstration of their commitment to, operate in a sustainable or a friendly, environmentally friendly manner. And if you look at ISO 14001 and the text contained therein, you will actually find 3 commitments that are required for the organization when they implement and adopt this standard. They are enhanced environmental performance, fulfillment of compliance obligation, and achievement of the organization or the implementing entity's environmental objectives. And, there's no specifics around that. The framework that's then described in or prescribed in the standard tells the organization how to organize and manage their people and processes so that they can understand what their environmental impacts are. But in managing and understanding environmental impacts, how do you know that you've enhanced environmental performance? How do you know that you have achieved your environmental objectives? Certainly, most organizations rely or plan to fulfill their compliance obligations. To not do so in an environmental perspective quite often can carry, legal and punitive financial consequences for the organization. No one wants to be on the front page for doing the wrong thing, in an environmental perspective. But what do these outcomes really mean? How does an organization that's implemented 14001 enhance environmental performance? How does it know that it has enhanced its environmental performance or achieve the objectives that it's set in trying to attain things like 100% renewable energy or zero waste or zero carbon impacts from their activities? So it's interesting in my experience, and I've spent a lot of time, in the last 5 or 6 years in organizations who've implemented ISO 14001, doing audits and working with them to try and improve not only their energy efficiency, but their, reduce their environmental impacts and improve their environmental performance. But I find a disconnect between what top management sees and thinks about these intended outcomes and what really happens in the organization. And, I would say, to overgeneralize, maybe most organizations I work with, they're satisfied as long as they can keep their certification on their environmental management system and they don't have any fines from their compliance obligations, that they consider themselves to be environmentally friendly, or they have enhanced their environmental performance because, see, they haven't violated any laws or done anything derogatory to the environment. But is that what we want? Is that where, what these intended outcomes are really about? And certainly the organization can take that approach. But what's beginning to happen in the marketplace and in the arena in particular related to standards and environmental management is there is a coming interest in actually trying to establish and understand what the science is for these outcomes. So when we say net zero, does that mean that my activities have a zero carbon impact? Does that include the commute that my workers have to do to get to their jobs? So they drive a car or they take public transportation, which produces a certain amount of emissions. Is the organization, should they account for that because they hired the employee? The employee wouldn't be creating the emissions if they didn't have to come to their work. So trying to understand how we evaluate environmental performance, what all this means is starting to gain some interest in the marketplace. I think you're going to see a greater interest in really relying on things that are measured and we're able to evaluate objectively in the future in this arena, and not just labels like I'm, Energy Star compliant, or I have an ISO 14001 certified environmental management system. So one of the intended outcomes of environmental management is enhanced environmental performance. But improving performance really requires that we understand two conditions, right? The first one is knowing what the basis is for that evaluation. What's the starting line? If I'm going to run a mile, I have to define when I started running, and at the end of some distance, a mile, I have to take some time to know, what that performance was, and then I have to evaluate that same condition in the future at some point to understand whether I have improved or not. So we really have to do two things. We have to know where we are, where's the start in this. And for our reference today, we'll talk about this being a baseline, for our analysis. And then what we're going to measure or what we're going to evaluate at some point in the future to be able to make the decision that we actually have improved, or we have not improved, or we've actually gone in the opposite direction to improvement when we compare that to the baseline. So we have to know those two things, and that may seem obvious to you, but it's not always easy for organizations to do, in my experience, in working with them in their environmental management programs. In the end, what we're really saying is that both of these points of that we have to establish in evaluating some performance measure requires something that we do measure or we evaluate. You know, there's some conditions, some or set of conditions that we need to collect the data on to know that things have improved. And I know, again, that sounds obvious to us, but there's a big disconnect in organizations sometimes between, you know, what management says that it wants to do and, you know, what the actual impacts that the organization makes. So it has been quoted, not by Drucker, but from Deming, that if you don't measure it, you can't control it. But that was not attributable to Deming. Deming actually said you can manage things that you don't measure. But Drucker, who was a famous, Peter Drucker, I believe he was a Harvard professor and a great business strategist, consultant, said if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. And that is true. And so if we're going to evaluate environmental performance, then we have to measure what that means. How do we do that? There's another quote I want to give you today. And again, this comes from my experience, but if you're serious about improving your environmental performance, you will measure and evaluate the results of your efforts. You'll be able to identify the things, the result of your environmental activities and the things that you're doing. And that's something that I say. And it's interesting when I talk to top management about their environmental programs, how they really have a hard time understanding, you know, how to evaluate. What does that really mean? And I'll ask you, so what are your environmental objectives? How will you know that you've achieved them? How will you know, if you're not in that position within your organization, but maybe you're somebody attending today and you work with companies in this arena, how will they know that they have actually achieved their environmental objectives, regardless of what they are? So reducing solid waste, reducing hazardous waste, which is, the big focus for our P2 program, waste reduction or elimination. And so it's really important that we think about what we need to measure, how we're going to monitor and analyze that to understand what our actions are doing to the environment and whether we have actually improved those or not over time. So in general, if you think about business in today's environment, metrics are, they're everywhere. And certainly with the automation and the artificial intelligence and all that we have, we can at times be overwhelmed by the amount of data that we have. But organizations that are effective really figure out how to use effective measures of their performance in any arena, whether it's for their main business and their position in the marketplace, their sustainability, their energy efficiency, their their development of their human resources. In the end, you have to somehow be able to evaluate what the outcomes of all that emphasis and activity is, and organizations rely on metrics to help them make those to understand those conditions and lead their management of them. But in general, things that you measure are things that you can then respond to, and they tend to get fixed. If you can somehow measure, employee satisfaction, then you can do something to address it. If you can somehow measure your environmental impacts or your energy efficiency or your production efficiency, then you can begin to focus on what impacts those and how do you change them. So measurement's really related to the organization's ability to drive its strategy and direction. Well, if organizations say they want to be more sustainable, then what are they measuring to be able to make decisions that affect that? We want, and getting back to the science-based targets, organizations should really base their decisions on not just how they feel about things, but what the evidence is telling them, factual-based decision making. That's one of the key principles for any good quality management system, is that to improve quality, you've got to be able to make decisions about the impact on your quality based on the facts, based on what the process is telling you. And in the end, these are how you drive performance improvement. If I understand how to get more fuel efficiency in my car, then I can change my behavior. I can change my actions. I can make choices and decisions that support that outcome. If I have no idea how to do that, then I'm probably not going to find a very effective result in trying to improve, the performance of my car. It's interesting to me, in all the audits I've done of environmental management systems, the big disconnect between what management says in the interview and what you find in the depths of the organization. And so you talk to top management and they will tell you a significant story. They're a deep and passionate commitment to, having a sustainable operation, to fulfilling their corporate objectives related to, energy, emissions, waste reduction, and so forth. You walk out onto the shop floor and start interviewing people and they've never heard of it. There's no understanding. Oh yeah, there may be some recycle bins, in the corner of the factory, or there might be a poster in the break room about being environmentally friendly and making the right choices. But in the end, what management communicates to the organization is it's all about production and it's all about profits. So one of the benefits of developing metrics related to environmental performance is it helps management demonstrate their serious commitment to these objectives. Because if you are going to put a measure down, you're going to actually get a score or evaluate yourself in some area, then you're going to follow through and make sure that it happens. And this really drives engagement at all levels in the organization. It moves it out of a silo that, just the environmental team manage, or something that top management would really like to see happen. But it becomes part of the thinking and the culture, really is what we're talking about, is developing that culture in the organization at all levels, so that it's not the driving factor, but it's something that people understand when they make decisions. Does this help or support the environmental objectives that we have, and how do we contribute to the metrics that we use to understand our environmental performance? So I would ask, you're all on mute, I'm not asking you to answer this question, but if you think for a minute in the picture here, there's some navigation going on, right? Someone's actually operating a vehicle. There's a rear view mirror, the GPS, and of course the windshield, the view out the front. Which field of view do you think best represents our current practice for the way organizations manage their environmental actions? And I would say that for the most part, we're looking backwards. We're looking in the rearview mirror, trying to see what our impacts were in the last month, the last quarter, the last year. How much waste did we generate? How much what were the emissions and our environmental impacts, and we might even compare 2 points in that rear view mirror to say, this is how much progress we made, which is a good thing. But how does that help us really drive to where we want to be? We got to somehow take what we see in the rear view mirror and let it help us understand how to plot a course on that GPS, how to steer the organization with our view through the windshield and manage the road ahead. And there is a way to do that. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the details of that today, but I just want to help create the questions in your minds, like how can we do a better job of taking what we measure and look at for environmental performance and do a better job of giving direction and purpose to our organization in reaching the destination that we've all said we want to arrive at, right? Which is zero, somehow having no impact on the environment when we produce and consume. So how do you get started? It's interesting in the assessments and the environmental audits that I've done, you meet to kind of get organized and talk about what you need. And, management usually says we have lots of data. We should be able to supply everything you need. And then you start asking, well, how much solid waste do you generate? And, they can't answer that question. You might ask, what's the combined greenhouse gas effect from all your energy consumption and other activities? They don't really know how to evaluate that. And so typically the data is there, but it's in a lot of different places and it's embedded in a lot of different forms. A key source of data that you would have in trying to begin to develop some metrics for your environmental performance would be your utility bills. So how much electricity did you consume in a period? And that's measured, through the electric meter. Same with natural gas or other fuels that you buy. They're somehow metered or sold to you. And, through the purchase or the invoice, you can usually determine that. Again, that's looking in the rearview mirror, but it's the basis really for building the data collection system. But you should also look at other sources of data that will help you understand your environmental performance, things like production records. If I use 10% electricity, let's say, last month over the month before, I think, well, that's pretty good, right? We're trending in the right direction. It's less. But then when you understand that production was half of what it was over the month before, but electricity was only 10% less, well, maybe that doesn't represent an improvement. So in order to fully understand the impacts, I really have to look at all the data, not just the direct measures, of my outputs or inputs. Another source of data might be scales. If you have things delivered by weight, whether that be, materials or packaging, it could be bulk fuels. Sometimes you'll need that. Certainly, those of you that have solid or other waste that get hauled off by contractors, when they dispose of that, they take your solid waste to the landfill, let's say, their truck will be weighed. Your container will be weighed for how many tons, or it might be a volumetric measure. Typically it's by weight, but their manifest or the tipping records associated with those actions help establish, your measurement of the waste stream. But there are a lot of other potential sources of data, and it's something that you have to really analyze on a case-by-case basis. But the point is that there's no really ready methodology in most organizations for trying to figure out what the environmental impacts are in a in the sense of a metrics. Where does all this data live? And you just have to start asking questions and identifying sources of data. It may be operator logs, it may be other data that some department or some supplier or contractor is collecting. Then you would certainly identify any gaps that you have. So let's take the example of solid waste. Let's say that fairly easy to come up with how many tons of landfill waste you sent to the landfill last month or last year. You can look at the bills, and you have the record of how much was dumped. How much of that landfill waste was potentially recoverable, reusable, or recyclable? So that's a data gap, right? You don't really know how to evaluate that waste stream beyond just, it got thrown in a trash can and we threw it away in the landfill. So the important thing is, don't beat yourself up about the data that you don't have, but start where you are. Figure out what you've got, but then ask yourself, what is it that we really need to know to be able to make better decisions? So again, being able to identify how much recyclable material was thrown away in the landfill is an important component of helping you divert that to, some recycler or some other way of disposing of it that has less impact, than going to the landfill. And so applying the principles of continual improvement, the plan, do, check, act, working to get measures where you don't have them, try to fill in the data gaps. How can you do that? I mean, the whole purpose of the organization is not to just generate environmental data, but there is a way to include that in the way you think about, managing your operations. The other decision that you have to make at this point is, how much history do I really need? So, that's an organization's individual decision that needs to be made. Do you want to just go back 1 year? Would it be relevant to look at the last 5 years? All of those will affect your ability to understand your performance and how much data you need to gather, but it is a decision that you have to make. It's interesting when I audit for ISO 14001 in particular, where one of the outcomes is about managing the compliance obligations that the organization has, where they're required to by law, whether it be through VOCs or BODs or there's water. There could be a lot of different regulated points in the organization. If it's hazardous or somehow regulated, and they have to report that to their local environmental management agency, guess what? They have the records, and they're pretty good records, and most organizations do a good job of doing that. So when you talk to management about their record keeping and environmental performance, they always point to their compliance obligations in those hazardous waste streams or regulated waste streams. And yeah, they do. But that's only a portion of the environmental impact. So don't leave out the things that you hadn't necessarily thought about. And think about all that comes into your organization and all that goes out of it, whether that is through the air, on land, or through water, and what are those impacts? And then begin to ask the hard questions about, is there any way to manage or do something with that? Again, I'll go back to Drucker's quote: if you don't measure it, you're not going to be able to improve it. And as you begin to measure and understand what your current state is in gathering this data, you can begin to think about what your intended outcomes would be. And to me, organizations that say we're going to be zero carbon by 2030, sometimes often they make that commitment without really understanding even how they can do that or what that means to get there. And so the data will really help you be able to set objectives that you can achieve and drive your performance. So certainly in gathering data, what we're attempting to do with environmental metrics is to measure what's happening. You know, what's our conversion efficiency for raw material? What is our emissions related to our activities? And in doing that, then be able to manage it, right? If I measure it, now I can at least make a decision and see what happens, right? If it goes up, maybe that was the wrong decision, or maybe we need to alter the decision or modify it in some way. If my measurements say that things are improving, then that gives me success and confidence about, future reductions and understanding how to do that, which is the ultimate aim of managing. If we're talking about environmental impacts, the goal is to reduce them, reuse things where we can or recycle things and get more efficiency and purpose out of all that we discharge from our systems. But in the end, I think another misconception in the marketplace today is the concept that, well, we're recycling this or we can somehow reuse it, therefore, it's sustainable or environmentally friendly, when the ultimate aim would be, if you can eliminate the need for it, you don't have to reuse it or even recycle it. And so ultimately, we don't want to forget that the whole objective in measuring and managing our environmental impacts is how can we not only reduce and reuse them, but identify ways to do without them. If I can figure out a way to get my raw material without any packaging, then I don't have to worry about trying to recycle the cardboard boxes that it came in. Is there some way to do that? And that's just a small example. So in gathering the data, you then have to decide, how do we analyze the data? What is the energy performance indicator? What measure? And I just abbreviated here in the slide with an EPI. But what is it we could measure that would really help me understand what my intended outcomes are for that waste stream or that evaluation of my environmental performance? Does that measure, is it something absolute? Or is there some relative analysis I should apply? What's the relationship in that relative analysis? Comparing waste to production, or maybe the ultimate aim is the elimination. So if you think about energy would be a simple example, and you're producing some material in bulk. And so you generate an environmental performance indicator that is the kilowatt hours it takes to produce a pound of product. And there's a certain amount of greenhouse gases associated with that energy, right? So that would be an example of a performance indicator we could use. And then I can track that over time. So kilowatt hours per pound of material, the nature of that ratio relationship says that I would expect improvement to be a reduction. I can produce the same pounds with less kilowatt hours and therefore reduce my environmental impacts in that. All of those are considerations you have to make, the decisions you need to decide, things you need to decide when you're trying to establish the right environmental metrics. And it doesn't need to be perfect. You need to get started. That's more important. You can always tweak and improve them over time. This would be a better way to understand, what's happening in this part of our process or this part of our business. And so it's a journey. It's not a destination. It's not that you'll set up something tomorrow and that will work forever. The other thing that's really important to sustaining and making sure that this is not just another thing, not the flavor of the month or management's emphasis, for the quarter, is define some responsibilities to individuals for helping to generate or collect the data. And it doesn't have to be a person. In fact, it's probably better if it's not. So let's say that accounting has the invoices. Accounting would probably have the invoices from the hauler for your solid waste. Well, on that invoice is the tons of waste when they dumped that container. Is there a way for accounting to log in a shared spreadsheet, let's say, that data from the invoice? So they're just populating what the invoices are telling. Somebody else could use the data in the spreadsheet and then to analyze, combine that with maybe some production data. But just think about who currently has access to the data that you need to collect, and how it can become a team approach to generating the right metrics. In the end, I think it's important to have someone who's responsible for seeing that it is entered and collected and analyzed in the way that you've decided is the most effective. Certainly, and let me back up and just say, and we're just about to the end. I know we're getting close to the end of the hour as well, so there's just a couple of slides. But I wanted to say that in understanding what the measures tell you and how you want to evaluate performance, certainly looking at absolute values like the amount of tons of solid waste you generate, or the amount of metric tons of CO2 your actions produced, or the whatever they are, those are certainly meaningful, but trying to relate those to other parts of your business practices. So in the early example I gave you, if your the thing you measure is an environmental impact, let's say it's your greenhouse gas through your energy, were reduced from 1 month to the next 10%, and you think that's good, but then you look at that compared to production, and production was 50%, that means that the actual greenhouse gas per unit of production was much more in the month that had the reduction than it was in the month before. And so trying to develop more advanced understandings of the relationships between the inputs and the outputs is a very important feature. One, it gives management a much better control in it. And going back to that picture that we talked about with the windshield and the GPS and the rearview mirror, you can actually build regression models using the data from the rearview mirror that now helps you understand what your expected view out the front windshield is going to be. Because if we operate like this and we do that for the next quarter, this is what we could expect our environmental impacts to be. So there's a lot of ways to take what you learn and develop in a historical perspective and use it to make better future decisions, to become smarter about the way you operate and have a better outcome and actually exceed your expectations for your environmental performance, because now you're making smart decisions based on what the data is telling you. And that's the point of this slide. Really, sustaining metrics is really about being able to rely on the data. You're consistent in collecting it, you have it, and then using it to make smarter and better decisions as you mature and advance in this arena. So I don't have a simple tool that would gather all the environmental data that you might need. Certainly, you probably have some if you have some compliance obligations related to your TRI or your air permits and things like that. You're collecting some data already. There are some really good tools in the P2 website, which is here. I was going to show you these, but I'm not going to take the time today. You can go look at them. There is supporting. There are also links in those spreadsheets to other sources of data and information related to P2 that I would really encourage you to look at. There's also a couple of tools for tracking your energy impacts, which would certainly affect your emissions and your analysis of that. There is a Department of Energy tool you can get at this website. It's an Excel spreadsheet format. And but it's not really set up for environmental reporting. It does some things that the Department of Energy needs it to do for some of its programs. So like one of the things it does is convert all your energy to primary energy. So if you consume a kilowatt of electricity, it multiplies that times 3 because that's what the utility on average had to consume to generate that kilowatt hour that you consume. There is one I want to show you, and then we'll go to your questions. Which is the tool that we developed here in the MEP at Georgia Tech to help organizations with their energy management. And this does directly support the energy review in ISO 50001 if you're familiar with it. But it will also help you track, and I just quickly wanted to show you that you can enter the energy data and the other variables that you have like production or weather and actually track the relationship in this one particular graph. Let me make it a little bigger. So this is total production and total energy. Energy is the orange line in the right graph and production is the blue line. And I can definitely see the correlation between, my production activities or my output and my energy. And you can do some other types of analysis with it. The other thing I would, and I don't think this is in the Department of Energy tool, but there is a greenhouse gas calculator in the back, which will take the history of your energy consumption in whatever units you want to analyze it. There are some basic conversion rates for CO2 coming from, I think, the EPA calculator. But you can, if you have your own, you can plug that in. So if you thought that your kilograms per kilowatt hour CO2 is actually, 0.75 instead of what we looked up for you, you can plug that in and it will, update the calculation based on your own evaluation. So this is not available by download, but you can certainly get it by emailing Sandra or myself, and we'll be glad to send that to you. So with that said, I've used most of our time, but we would be glad to take any questions that you have. I will take a minute and just say we hope that you'll tune in to our next webinar, which is September 2nd, and you can go to our website to register for that. So any questions, Sandra, in the chat, or anyone want to make a comment or have anything to say?
Yeah, sure. Right now, I don't see any questions or comments in the chat or the question tab here, but please feel free to either unmute yourself or let us know, let me unmute you so you have questions. But thank you, Randy, very much. This was very informative. I personally like the way that you were able to make the connections to a lot of these terms that we hear over and over about, climate change, net zero, carbon neutral, to our own performance indicators and the role that they play in environmental performance. So I think it was great the fact that you touched about science-based targets and what that means for an organization, and where to find this data so we can manage the environmental aspects better. But so thank you, I appreciate it. Let's see, we have more questions here, or we have any? Okay. All right, so I don't see any more questions, but if you don't have time right now to write your questions or ask your question out loud, please feel free to email us. My contact information is right there, as well as Randy's. I would like to take that moment to invite you for our next webinar, which is September the 2nd, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions through low to no cost energy efficient projects. Thank you very much. With that, we are up to the hour. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Randy. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.